Wait, side note, did we decide what we're actually naming this podcast?
You told me. You
Oh my
told
God.
me.
Welcome to Growing with the Stars, a podcast helping you navigate using astrology through uncertain times. I'm Katie, and I'm a traditional astrologer with over 10 plus years of study.
And I'm Kat, and I am a noob. I'm here to learn, ask questions, kind of work as a stand-in for the audience the best I can. I'll ask what I can, and then, of course, we will probably open to questions later on, I'm sure.
I mean, ultimately, this podcast is to help anyone show up. And yeah, partly it's important to say that you don't need a ton of astrology knowledge. You don't need to have all the lingo and the terms to get started. And we just really want to use some traditional tools like the tropical zodiac, the traditional planets through Saturn to help you kind of get through whatever is coming your way. And we know that. We're recording this at the end of June 2025, and there is a lot going on in the world, and can also be going a lot at any time in our personal lives too. And so I thought we would start with one of my favorite places when there's a lot going on, which is how do you tackle emotional and physical processing? How do you do self-care? And in astrology, the place I always start with that is the moon. And your moon sign, its placement can really highlight your unique ways, your specific ways that you think about all of these things. And I'm hoping that we can navigate through this because self-care can be a little murky. We have a lot of capitalism co-opting it. And so this is really a way to sort of think through how you tend to yourself, how might you tend to your body, how do you help regulate during times of uncertainty, and help you kind of get started to help yourself. This is supposed to be sort of an intro, and it's not going to be an explanation of everything about your moon sign. But my hope is that this is a great place to kind of get you started with some useful tips and tricks. So
So, what is a moon sign, Katie?
that's a great question. So the moment you were born, right? A lot of people know that they have sun signs, right? Where the sun was when you were born, but you actually have an entire snapshot of the sky the moment you were born. And that includes looking at where the moon was in the sky when you were born. And as an astrologer, we would look at things like which zodiac sign is it in? Which house is it in your chart? And also in a one-on-one reading, I would look at things like what aspects is it making, like what's its relationship to other planets in your chart, and help tell your story. And so the moon changes signs about every 2.5 days. And so, lots of people might have the sun in Cancer, but, one person might have the sun in Cancer, and the moon in Aries. And another person might have the sun in Cancer and the moon in Gemini, and they are going to have sort of different flavors of experiences and ways that they relate to the moon. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So, how would I I know, I know where my stuff is in my chart. But if you didn't, right,
Yeah.
how would you find your moon placement? How would you go about doing that?
It's a great question. The best way to start, so you're going to need three pieces of information. You need your birthday, your birthplace, where you were born, and you're also going to need an exact birth time. Um, This is where things like birth certificates or baby books or even birth announcements can be super useful. Um, if you have a kind of approximate time of day, you'll usually have a good sense of what your moon sign is, but because it does change so frequently, like, there are people that are born on the same day, but the moon changes signs. And so those three pieces of information together, you can go to a site like astro.com or my personal favorite, which is astro-seek.com. And you put that information in there and it'll auto generate your entire birth chart for you. It's really lovely that we have computers to do these calculations for us because back in the day, astrologers had to calculate it all by hand.
I know I've seen you like work your brain magic too, like where you've been like, oh, this is here, so it must be over here. So I know you've got like that calculation going on in your head. But like with the calculations and stuff, like what I know there's like a bunch of different ways to do it, right? So like what methods do you prefer? And like
Yeah.
how do you go about with your practice? Because I know this is something that you do, right? And this isn't just like your hobby, or we're not just, doing the podcast for funsies. Like this is like your thing. Like you do chart readings and stuff like that for people in
Yeah.
general.
So there are different ways to like do a birth chart. And you're going to hear some differences like tropical versus I don't know if I ever say it right, but sidereal, which is are the zodiac signs, what are they anchored to? Are they anchored to constellations or are they anchored to the equinoxes and the solstices? Um, and then there's also different house systems, which is kind of like how do you cut up the chart into the 12 sections? Sort of how do we determine what areas are which in the chart? Which is there's a lot of math in that as well, and a lot of different points of view. In my system, I use a lot of traditional, what are called Hellenistic techniques, sort of from the texts that we've been able to kind of revive in the last 20 or so years. And so I'm going to use the tropical zodiac. So that's based in sort of the seasons and the equinoxes and the solstice. So Aries seasons always starts with the spring equinox. Capricorn season always starts with the winter solstice. Um, and I'm going to use whole sign houses, which is a fancy way of saying, let's just say you were born and you see on your chart that you have like 23 degrees Gemini rising. What that means is the entire sign or the whole sign of Gemini would be your first house, and the whole sign of Cancer is your second, and so on and so forth. There's lots of different systems, and they're not necessarily better or worse than any others, but in the techniques that I use, that's just what works for me. But there's a lot of ways to go about it. What we're going to talk about mostly today isn't super um, wedded to any of those specific techniques. But in some of our future episodes, they might have more of a focus on some of those issues. We're really going to be talking about the moon, it's and what zodiac sign it is in today. Um, yeah, I hope that makes sense. It can get really complicated really quickly. And so, if you want to learn more about any of these topics, leave us a comment and we can definitely dive into that in a future episode.
Yeah, so like okay, thinking of that then, so what like do like when you get down into it then like with your moon, my moon for example is in Cancer, like what do these placements like actually mean? How do we start to like analyze and look at these placements? Like what do we need to be looking at, and like how do we like go about understanding and working with that in regard to like what we're here for today, which is self-care, right? Is like using our moon for
Yeah.
self-care during like this chaos.
Yeah.
This
I mean, the moon often tells us both, we'll look at like the sign today, and like next time we're going to look at like houses. And it often tells us what tends to resonate for us around both, I think, emotional care, where we find emotional safety, as well as our physical bodies. In traditional astrology, each of the planets can have like a bajillion significations. You can see these really random lists if you ever read an ancient text. They seem quite strange on the surface, but there's just a huge spectrum. And what it comes often back to, I find in my client readings, is that the moon speaks to how we process emotions, how we find safety, and also like what tending looks like. The moon does traditionally rule our bodies and our emotions and has a lot to do with sort of creation and the beginning of things. And so, oftentimes, when we're really agitated or we're really reactive, I find people really starting to more and more embody their moon sign. And I do this as well. I see it in myself all the time where I'm like, I have the moon in Sagittarius, and when I like get really emotional, I often like need to like rush out or have space, or I like need to sit with like really spiritual philosophical poetry. Like it's me and my book of Hafiz poems, or like Mary Oliver, and it feels very very Sag coded. And we'll get into more of that. But I think before we can really move through the world and think about how we want to be part of things, we can't, if we don't have a good practice for helping and healing ourselves, not that we need to be perfect, but if we don't have our own ability to regulate and take care of ourselves, it's really hard to manage the rest of it, right? You can't pull from an empty well. And yeah, your moon sign will speak to a lot of this. And we'll talk through some examples for each of the signs so that you can kind of get a sense of what this might look like. Um, there are always exceptions depending on things like what aspects your moon is making. And, if you're a day or a night chart, there's sort of lots of things to take into account. And so, please take what resonates. But also know that, like, to really get a perfect understanding, you may really need to get a reading with an astrologer, whether it's with me or with there's so many amazing astrologers out there as well. So, uh, we're going to do our best to try to be as specific as possible, but knowing that, like, we can't go through every iteration of how this might be showing up for you.
As much as we'd probably like to. It would be very fun, I'm sure, but the details get a little
Yeah.
intense. Yeah. And I'm
Yeah.
sure there's an episode of Jargon coming up eventually too, because I'll be here. You'll just watch. I'll be like, so I guess like, should we start then at the very beginning, finding out, let's see. So I guess how we would tend to ourselves, our bodies, our regulation kind of based on the moon, right?
Yeah.
And how we can approach that differently through, the sign. Today we're focusing specifically on signs and how we can regulate with that. What
Yeah.
would you,
And the
starting
way
at
I
the
like to
beginning there.
describe that, oh, sorry.
No,
Go ahead.
no, go ahead.
The way I like to describe the moon in the sign is think about the moon as like a character in a play, and your zodiac sign is the landscape it's in, where you might maybe feel most comfortable, maybe most safe. And um, there are sort of landscapes where the moon is maybe more at home or treated well, right? It has more ease versus places where it might be far from home. Like imagine like the actor Kevin Hart in a comedy, he's in his natural element and he's able to like work really easily versus I don't know, granted I don't know why I picked Kevin Hart of all people, but imagine Kevin Hart in like a very Shakespearean melodrama. Not that he couldn't probably do it, but that the range and the work for being a comedian there is much more limited, right? So it's not that him as an individual is good or bad in either of those situations, but there might be more flexibility in some places, a lot more power or dignity, as we would call it, and in some places where there's just more of a struggle. And we'll talk about a little bit of that as well. Um, and so just to kind of dive in, let's talk about the moon in Aries, right? This is a cardinal fire sign. So, what I mean by that is the sign Aries is a sign that initiates things, right? It starts the spring season, right? Fire already kind of gives us an elemental feel to it, and it's ruled by Mars. So, there is a lot around initiation, moving very quickly, being comfortable, especially with conflict or rushing into things. And so this already starts to kind of give us some ideas of how, these folks might find better regulation or some self-care, which is like, how do you allow yourself to try things and not feel like you have to follow through, right? The cardinal signs love to start things, but follow through is not always your strong suit, right? With fire, what helps you burn off energy, right? What helps you, maybe it's movement, maybe it's getting to just have a time with your fun ideas. Um, there needs to be some sort of like aspect of burning off energy that can be really important for y'all. And also, there's a sense of like competition being something that feels really cathartic for you, like healthy competition, right? Maybe it's like playing competitive games with friends. Maybe it's like trivia night. Um, Having some space for that is going to be really feel really good for you in a way that it might not for some of the other moon signs. And this looks really different than the next moon sign, which is the moon in Taurus. And this is a landscape where the moon does very, very well. Traditionally, this is called an exalted moon, which is fancy term for like being a really nice guest. Like you're at your best friend's house and they treat you super well and you get to be all cozy. I also am just imagining this as a passenger princess where you get to sit in the car and somebody else does all the work and you just get to relax. I have to do some more digging on that if that's the perfect metaphor or not, but I'm working with it today. And here, these folks know how to take care of themselves. These folks know how to like indulge and rest. I have a friend with the moon in Taurus, and he literally can play video games for 5 hours straight. I don't know how he does it. And this is a fixed earth sign. So this is the sign of middle of spring. This is a sign where habits have a huge amount of staying power. These are the folks that know how to continue doing things for the long haul. And that can be really beneficial. But if it's a habit that doesn't serve you, it can be really hard to break. Um, and it's also a sign that is the home of Venus. And so there's a lot about connection and beauty and comfort here. This is like the beauty of like a really nice sensual meal versus like high heel beauty. Um,
So
and
like an earthy, more of an earthy, like natural, not natural to be like, that's not, but natural, like really comes from the ground type, feet in the earth, feet in the mud type beauty.
yeah, it's very much like what feels good, like what's an embodied
Mm.
comfort and beauty. If it tastes good, if it like really is enjoyable for the five senses, um, that's what these folks really care about. And so sometimes these folks, the self-care is about, in some ways they can either be really good at it and or it could be that they like overindulge sometimes in avoidance of things. And so the first thing is like, how can you get back to nature, like spending time at the park or outside? Um, Being able to like be around beautiful spaces can be really important for these folks to just like stay grounded and connected. Um, and there's also a question of like, what are your habits? These are people that are definitely creatures of habits. Are your habits serving you really well? Where are your habits maybe not serving you? And how to kind of have that balance. And, you know, how can, if you are making a change, if you are wanting to start doing something different, how can you include something that is physically comforting for you as part of that? Like maybe you want to start going to the gym. I don't know. How do
I
you
think
make sure?
physical comfort too is so different for everybody too. So when you say that, like, for some of us, it could be like a snack or like
Yeah.
laying
Yeah.
down or like you said, going to the gym or
Yeah.
going outside and just standing in the air.
Yeah, or like let's talk the snack metaphor. Like, okay, maybe you want to eat, I don't know, you want more fiber in your diet. How can you make sure that the food you add some foods to your diet that taste good to you? Because let's be real, with the moon in Taurus, if you don't like the taste, you're not going to do it. That's fine.
Yeah.
It's just
No.
acknowledging what works for you and leaning into that versus trying to be somebody you're not.
Don't try to be who you're not when your moon's in Taurus. It's uncomfortable. Be physically comfortable.
I mean, I would say that for every moon sign, this is not
Well, yeah, I mean for real.
but yeah, I mean, also an exalted moon, like, yeah, I mean, there, I wouldn't give that up. I'm
Yeah.
always like, what's that like having exalted planets? I don't know. If you have experiences, please share, let us know more. Um, Make us feel jealous about it a little bit, maybe. The next moon sign is Gemini moon. And as much as Taurus moons can be very chill and do the same thing for a long time, we have a very different vibe here. Gemini is a mutable air sign, and it's at the end of the spring season, right? Gemini season, and it's very changeable. Things are shifting a lot. It's very restless. We have an air sign here. And so these folks understand things can change on a dime and they're very adaptable, and that can be really beneficial in some cases. But we also get folks that can be chronically online, right? We get folks that are constantly in their head. Um, these folks can be a little bit, doom scrolling is really common and or avoiding feelings by constantly being social. it's easy for these folks to, and as somebody with a Gemini stellium, this happens to me as well. I have a lot of planets in Gemini to kind of stay in your neck up, like you don't really live in your body. Um, and so for these folks, I always like to ask, like, hey, you don't have to live in your body all the time. I'm not expecting that, but like, what does a body scan once a day look like? How can you sort of check in with your body? What does that look like for you? What comes up for you? Right.
So would they
Um,
do well with like a breathing exercise, like type for like checking in on that body? Is that like a good
yeah, so the body scan is an exercise as well, where you can kind of close your eyes and you sort of mentally kind of sort of check in with your like different parts of the body. So you kind of go from head to toe and you'll sort of notice things. Like for me, I will tend to notice, like, yes, my neck is incredibly tight again, or oh, I am holding a lot of tension in my right foot. And there's not something that you have to do with it per se, but sometimes getting out of your head can be really good to sort of take a break from all the thoughts and allows you to reconnect. This is a problem I tend to see with air moons, so that's not just Gemini. We'll get to Libra and Aquarius as well, um, where they're just really, really comfortable simply being a brain. And reconnecting that there is also a body can be very grounding and sort of get out of the brain first mentality. Gemini folks as well. Gemini is a sign that's ruled by Mercury, the planet of communication. And so having a way to kind of get your thoughts out of your head can be really helpful, like journaling or voice notes to yourself or talk therapy, if that's something that's available or you're comfortable with. Um, Art journaling for these folks can also be really good, or just having some close friends that you can just sort of talk things out. There is this sort of need, especially for this sign. It's the constellation of the twins. So there's often a doubling that works really well for these folks in a way that some of the other signs don't need. And that's totally okay. Um, and the other thing I have to remind these folks, and I also have to remind myself this, is you can do everything. You just can't always do it at the same time.
we're sure I don't have a lot of Gemini placements, right? Like that's just that one, right? Like it just feels
Yeah.
like so resonant too.
Yeah.
I know you
Especially
can always resonate with other signs, but it's just hilarious. I'm like, are you sure you're not calling me out right now? Are you positive?
listen, I'm also calling out myself. I think the mutable folks, so that's Gemini, Sagittarius, Virgo, and Pisces, can have some similarities because they're all at the end of their seasons. And so there is this sort of being stretched too thin aspect can really come up. They tend to express it in somewhat different ways, but um, similar lived experiences is pretty common.
That's funny. Yeah, see, and I think that's important too, is like to think about when you think about like an astrology, just how there are similarities where between where your placement, like my moon is in Cancer, but I still have similarities with somebody whose moon is in Gemini, and how like everything sort of just affects everything else.
Yeah, you are a whole complicated map, and you're not just one thing, which makes it hard to like explain it and also like way too nuanced sometimes for social media, but also like we are too complicated and nuanced for social media to contain us. And your chart needs to represent your whole life. And if it's not, like, I mean, that's the complexity is partly why astrology has survived for over 2000 years, because it's a system that reflects the complexity of being a human and the messiness of being a human in a way that, like, I don't know, like one person, like a 16 personality type quiz can't really contain. Let's talk about the moon in Cancer, which is where the moon thrives. The moon is at home here, which means it's like you being in your own house. You have full access to resources, you have full control of your space, you're super autonomous. Like it's great. Love it. Um, And these folks can often, they feel very deeply. There is a lot of caretaking here and a natural ability to caretake and to feel really deeply about it. They can often become sort of the mom person in their life and their friend's life, really depending on like the house this might be coming up in, so what topic area it's showing up in. Um, but these folks can easily slip into that role because they just are very good at noticing and caretaking um, for others. Um, I also tend to notice that these folks often evolve and also emotionally change a lot over time. So the moon in Cancer, these folks evolve and change a lot. Partially also because the moon is the fastest moving planet we have in the zodiac. Like, and so I find that these folks also have a tendency to have a lot of growth and evolution over time because the moon just has a lot of natural ease and speed here. Um, and so for these folks, you know, I like to really highlight as good as you are at taking care of everybody else, how are you making space to prioritize your own needs? The martyr complex does come up here. You're
I'm not.
shaking your head.
I'm not. I'm not making space. I'm not. Well, no, okay. I've gotten better, but
Good.
you know, really, I'm not.
Yeah, I mean, it's and it doesn't have to be a whole lot, right? This is also a cardinal sign. So like Aries, I think it's a lot about starting very, very small, right? And it doesn't have to mean that you like have a me day once a week or a treat yourself day every so often. It can be something as simple as like, okay, like I have a to-do list today, and one of those items has to be about me. And I have to do that, right? Doesn't mean that like your entire day is all about you, because no offense, but some of y'all are deeply uncomfortable prioritizing yourselves, which is understandable, but you can't pull from an empty well. Um, and if you don't prioritize yourself, yeah, it gets really messy very quickly and it doesn't help anybody. Um, I also just find that these folks, if you can spend time by water, bodies of water, or like playing sounds of water, like ocean waves on Spotify, or getting to spend time by a lake, or even just getting to put your feet in some hot water can be really soothing for y'all.
Yeah, I used to like if I tend to overheat. So I like to
Mm.
run my wrists under like cool water from the sink, which tends to cool me down, but also like it's just
Yeah.
like very soothing. So sometimes I'll just do it and I'll just sit there like this. It's very relaxing. Definitely 10 out of 10 recommend.
I love that. Yeah. And like that's the thing is ideally like you don't need to have a huge you don't need to splurge and like go to the beach to like have access to some of these things. They can be within your own home. Just like I was saying with the Gemini moons about the body scan, like having a little bit of time with like if you're having some big emotions, some things like have you heard of box breathing?
Have it's like 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, something like that. Or is
So
that the
yeah,
one it's like you breathe in a box basically. I can
yeah.
visualize it, but I couldn't explain it to you. You count.
Yeah. So basically, the way I would do it, just to make it really simple, is you sort of do like a square box. And so you breathe in for 4, you hold for 4, you breathe out for 4, you wait for 4. And you could do that with 2, 2, 2, 2, or 3, 3, 3, 3. I think for Cancer folks, like having some space to feel your feels in a way that feels safe for you can also be really important. And sometimes box breathing can kind of let you like have a little like quiet moment to feel it without it sort of becoming the main character.
It's interesting to me because I've always, I joke sometimes about, oh, I'm so weepy, because I do feel weepy inside, right? But I do seldom cry about my own feelings.
Mm,
So maybe just giving yourself some time, carve a little space out to cry might be a good one too. Or just,
absolutely.
yeah, that's interesting that you say that. Just let yourself feel because we're supposed to be so emotional, but we just don't be emotional for everybody else.
Yeah, and I think it's also like what we're socialized is okay emotion, right? Like I think especially um for women or people that are women presenting or femme presenting, we're socialized that we're supposed to be taking care of everybody else. We're supposed to feel for everybody else, but that our own emotions can make us too emotional or crazy. And I don't know, like the kind of line that I try to hold is that like all of our emotions are real and valid, but they're not always like objective, right? Like I have the right to be hurt about something somebody said. Does that mean that like their intention was to hurt me? Is a very different question, right? And so holding space for your feelings and having a space for it to process it is also very different than like being emotional and like yelling at everybody because you're having a bad day.
Very true. And that's interesting that you put it that way because I always look at it as my feelings are my feelings, whether they're sourced in something that is reality or I am creating a scenario, right? I still feel that way.
Mm,
So maybe not like real, but they're all valid, right? So it's just
exactly.
interesting the way that you put it. I just, you know, that speaks to me. It's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think I had to learn the hard way that if I don't let myself feel my feelings, they find a way to be goblins one way or the other inside of me, and so I might as well let the little emotional goblin have a little space and control the space a little bit better versus like having it just show up at the bar while I'm on my second tequila shot, just as a
Yeah, they don't
maybe an
tend
example.
to play well with others, the emotional goblins.
No,
No.
no.
So what would Leo's emotional goblin look like?
Oh, what does my emotional goblin look like?
The Leo moon?
Oh, that one. Yes, the Leo moon emotional goblin is a bit of the diva. And it's funny because whenever I think of Leo moon, God, I'm so old when I probably say this. When I think of Leo moons, I am probably an old woman as I say this, but I think of the Billy Joel song The Entertainer because there's a line where it's like, I am the entertainer and I know just where I stand, another serenader and another long-haired band. And there's this very performative aspect to Leo moons. Um, they're all about wanting to be seen, right? They want to feel safe. They want to feel so there's a need to have some center of attention. Um, and they're also pretty consistent about this. This is a fixed fire sign. So once again, we see the fire, that sort of expression, that sort of outward momentum, but it's more stable, kind of like Taurus, because it's from the middle of summer. And so they are also very habit driven. Um, and they're going to have more of a desire. Sometimes it's like being a funny entertainer or the comedian, but sometimes it's just like they're very safe with a persona or a role versus showing you the messy inside. Um, these are folks that also, whoever they kind of consider their pride or their kind of group, they're very protective of. They're going to be sort of the mama lion of that group and want to sort of protect their people. Um, and so for these folks, I like to ask, like, how can you be a witness to your own emotions, right? How do you not just express them, but feel like you can be seen in your emotions? Do you always need an audience for them, or when can you be your own audience, if that makes sense? Because, not everything needs to be out in the world. Um, but there is a way also to say, like, how is self-expression or art a place for your emotions? It doesn't have to be, a super professional thing, but it can be something as simple as like karaoke with your friends at a bar or in like a private room, or it can be art journaling. It can be really great for these folks. Or just like having a way to kind of express your feelings in a way that you can maybe either share with folks or, feel seen doing and or witness for yourself. Um,
You can even do karaoke at home, toss on a couple old CDs or, YouTube it if you want to get modern. It's fine. I'm not from the early 2000s at all, CDs. I didn't date myself there or anything.
Oh my God. We're bringing CDs back. We're bringing back digital cameras. It's going to be great.
Physical media. Let's bring it back. Mm-mm.
Yeah, bring back a zine. A zine's another really good way to express yourself and be creative. Um, the other thing I like to think about for these folks is that it is really important who your people are. And there's a traffic light theory. I don't remember who came up with this, so apologies for not knowing my source, but um, there's often people we're around and they can kind of feel like a traffic light. And the ones that we're really good at sort of filtering out are like the red light folks, the folks that like you can't really be yourself with, you don't really know how to say anything to. They're sort of this total stop, right? And the people we love and we want to spend a lot of time with are green lights. We kind of get to be our full self, as all systems go. The tricky people are the yellow lights, the ones where we um, sort of get to be ourselves. We sort of feel like we have to slow down or we have to like hedge ourselves. That's right. Like it's the sort of the way a yellow light is that you're supposed to slow down. You're not allowed to kind of go your full self. And I think my question for the Leo moons is like, who in your life makes you feel like you can't be your full self, right? Who do you feel like you have to kind of hedge for? Um, who makes you feel like parts of you must be dismissed in order to be accepted and liked? Because I'm a Leo rising. I get it. We like to be liked. We like to be seen and acknowledged, but making sure you have people around you that are going to validate your authentic self is really important for these folks. Because otherwise you will have more of a likelihood of sort of trying to play nice when you're not really super happy, if that makes sense. Sign is Virgo. And these folks, you're very good at kind of muting your needs in the moment. Like if they're not super like kind of easily to downplay your emotions, right? It's very easy to get really into like productivity hacks and refining things and all the ways that you can sort of fix yourself. And it's really easy also to like kind of focus on all the details and the things that kind of aren't working. Virgo is very humble, and it is also really interested in adapting. It's another mutable sign, it's mutable earth. And so there's a real focus sometimes on the practical and the tangible. Um, and this can both make you really good at sort of evolving and growing, but it can also, how do I put it? It can also kind of make you really good at sort of constantly trying to move too quickly through your feelings and not giving yourself enough space to like feel your feels sometimes. Um,
Is it like a very analytical, like in a box type? Like this is step one, step two, step three. I've gone through these steps. Now we're done. Bye.
yeah, it can be very structured, right? This is good, this is bad, this is order, this is chaos, it can feel, you can kind of get to like extreme journaling can feel like this, where you're so into like all of the little habits, you're not sort of taking a step back and looking at the larger sort of moment to say, okay, is this serving me? How is this supporting me? What might I need to kind of look at from a larger perspective? Um, because Virgo is ruled by Mercury, the details is where you can get really, really refined, but it's so small oriented that sometimes you're like, wait, is this making me happy? How do I feel about all of this? Um, and so, honestly, for these folks, I really love to start with compassion and self compassion. Um, there's a really great Buddhist book it's called Start Where You Are. It's by Pema Chödrön, I believe. And I really love this book because their philosophy is all that like change you can still grow and evolve as a person, it's really important, but that you actually have to start with some self-compassion. And I think sometimes Virgo can get really negative on itself, and the moon in Virgo can be very sort of self-negative. And so how is compassion, when are you gentle with yourself? How can you be as kind to yourself as you are to others? And sort of bringing that back in can be really helpful. um if you are going to bullet journal, there is nothing wrong with that, but like, hey, like, is there self-care as part of the checklist? Is there a way to kind of create moments of check-in with yourself around your sort of systems and habits. Like, are these serving you? Or are they kind of becoming a large, constant, like, or is it not serving you? Like, how do you create moments for adapting? And also, these folks are really into like giving back, like volunteering and service is such a huge part and can feel really meaningful for these folks. And now is that, how is that something that can be also like joyful and serving yourself? Like, if you're miserable doing the volunteering that you're doing, like maybe there's a different kind of volunteering you can do, right? You don't need to, just because it's a good thing to do, doesn't mean it's you're the best person to do it, if that makes sense.
You
Uh,
don't have to take on absolutely everything for it to be done.
yeah.
You can
But
delegate some tasks
yeah,
or go outside of what of yourself to have things done for you.
you
Want,
know,
seems a little.
a little offshoring for these folks is a good thing. Yes, they might not do it to the exact same standards you have, but you can't do it all, and that's also okay. Just like the Gemini moons, you can do it all, but you can't do it all at the same time. Also, finally, you these are earth sign folks. Spending time around plants, spending time in nature, really, I feel like these folks probably love to garden and are really good in gardening. And so like spending time tending to plants or tending to nature can be really, really soothing for y'all.
I would imagine even just like if you live in an apartment, like getting a potted plant, if you have like pets,
Yeah.
one potted plant that you just like talk to every day and vibe with, you know.
You can also check your local buy nothing group. I got one of my first plants as a cutting of a pothos. They're super easy. It's thriving. There's lots of very easy apartment plants. Snake plants are also pretty chill. I say this as somebody that's like, I've kept plants alive for like 2 years. I'm very proud of that. Not saying everything has grown.
Yeah, there are a lot of house plants, pothos, spider plant, monstera. Monstera is kind of a house plant. I mean, you can do like a fiddly fig, things like that that you can usually get for indoors. The with the fiddly fig though, it's not pet safe. A lot of these are not pet safe, so you always want to double check. Always double
Yeah.
check. Um, especially because most of the plants that are generally pet safe are like roses and sunflowers. Like when you bring cut flowers into your house, I think snake plant, but like, yeah,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
always do a little check
Do a
there.
little due diligence.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Um, I love as I saying this is I have like both cats in this room right now, just like staring and being creepy. It's fine. They're just staring at me.
They just want to say hello.
Absolutely.
They're not being creepy. They're being observant. They're watching you. They're protecting you right now from the ghosts. Okay.
Actually, I think that is one of the things that is happening. Dusk is definitely staring at some things in this room. We'll find out what it is later.
Okay. Well, fingers crossed. We'll find out what that is, and hopefully we can put them to peace by talking about the Libra moon. Maybe
Exactly.
that's what they're here for. They're like, can you move on to the Libra? Like, I just want to hear about my moon sign and then I can pass on.
I mean, the moon in Libra does prioritize peace and harmony. Um, they can be conflict avoidant, right? They want things to be state like they want balance and or they're willing to sort of swallow their own feelings in order for there to be like peace and harmony amongst a group, right? This is a cardinal air sign and it is ruled by Venus. And so these folks really love the idea of harmony. They love aesthetics and the, like balance. And so they're often very into like how aesthetics can be and or clothing or fashion can be something that like is soothing or self-soothing, right? Like things that look really nice to wear might be something that's a real mood booster to them, or like having their nails done, or like getting their like having their hair blown out. I'm just thinking of like very femme things right now, but sort of aesthetics can be something that's really sort of puts them at ease. Uh,
Listen, a man or they or anyone who can walk into a nail salon, get their nails did, like as I sport my like last of my black nail polish on my thumbs that I need to paint. Look, we're very real here, okay?
absolutely,
You know, I
absolutely.
I'm I'm super here for it. I get your feet done, you know,
Yeah.
get your nails done, go into your own bathroom, do a little cleanup. It's
Yeah.
beautiful. It's a
And it
beautiful thing.
Yeah, and it might be like wearing a hat, like the right kind of hat, or maybe your favorite pair of boots, like sort of having these aesthetics, things can be very comforting to them. Um, and for these folks, once again, as an air moon, it is also easy to stay in your head or to over prioritize and sort of ignore your feelings. And you all also need to get into the body, right? You need to remember that you're more than a head and a neck. Um, and also, the main thing I love to tell these folks is you are part of the equation and the sort of a balance and harmony equation that you're thinking about. How can you prioritize yourself? How are you part of the equation? You don't have to be like the biggest part of it, but if you're not in it, you're not really getting the harmony that you're thinking of. And you also, I think it's also really important to like have space for your emotions. They're going to be messy, they're going to be raw, they're not going to always like look perfect and polished. And having some space to be messy, to be raw, whatever your version of that is really important. Like you need a kind of judgment-free zone for you. Because I think these folks are just sort of can be so aware of how they can things can rock the boat that they might. I'm thinking of just some of the Libra moons that I know that like they're sometimes like, wait, they'll almost disregard their own kind of issue in a conflict until it gets way, way too big.
Yeah, even thinking about the Libra sun that I know, they really just put themselves kind of back and back and back to, at the, you know, at their own detriment, I guess,
Yeah.
really, unfortunately. So really just the prioritizing. Don't be afraid to let people see that there's a side of you that feels or is like raw and deep and emotional, you know. Um, try, you know, not to withdraw when you feel that, you know, oh, I must keep up this perfection because it'll throw everybody else's stuff out of balance. No,
Right.
we're here for you.
And it's interesting because in some ways, the moon in Scorpio, which is a place where the moon really struggles, this is the moon is in what we call fall here, kind of understands the contradiction, which is that vulnerability and our difficult emotions can actually be a source of deep intimacy and deep connection. Brene Brown has found this in her research. We've seen it a lot where like part of intimacy is vulnerability, is the raw, messy areas and like having a safe way to show that. And the moon in Scorpio might feel really socially odd in a world that doesn't really prioritize those things, right? We prioritize our comfort, we prioritize our ease, we prioritize harmony. And these folks they want the emotional truth. This is a fixed water sign and ruled by Mars. And so they're very comfortable with raw and difficult emotions. They want truth more than they want the politeness. They have a really good nose for when people are lying to them. And these people are incredibly loyal, incredibly loyal. Um, Ride or Die was written about Scorpio placements. Um, and so that's definitely something I see there as well. Um, but these folks can be susceptible to thinking that there's another layer deeper, that there's always something deeper to something. Um, Telling them it's not that deep is the thing that will make them mad. And sometimes that is true. Sometimes it's not. Um, but sometimes you got to know when that's another layer deeper or not. And I think for a lot of these folks, um, their issue isn't that they are unable to handle difficult emotions, but that their way of processing looks very socially atypical. That they're really comfortable often in times, sort of the raw, dark place, and um, kind of validating that your way of dealing with things isn't bad. It's just different. Um, and that, to focus once again, like the Leo moons on like folks that understand your comfort with emotions and to really make sure that you have some community that kind of understands and acknowledges your way of processing and isn't constantly like judging you that you're willing to kind of go messy and deep with somebody at the coffee shop.
But are they good at that just with others, or are they good at that with themselves also? Is that something they struggle with the self? What do you think, generally
They
speaking?
can struggle with it themselves. I think that the other side of it is that they can easily really hold on to feelings of being hurt and stew on the negative. And like part of the difficulty is with a fixed moon is that emotionally it's hard to shift, right? You're in a mode and you don't really move all that easily. And so if you're stuck in a place of comfort and ease, that's a much more positive experience than being stuck in a place of pain and sorrow and like all of your harm. And so there is a question of like, how do you make sure that you move through your feelings and how do you give space and time not just to feel your feels, but to let yourself process them and also release? Are you releasing things or are you still upset about something that happened 5 years ago? Right?
So
If you're
with Scorpio being like a water sign, would be like getting in the water and moving in the water be something that
absolutely. I think getting in the water can be really good. I think processes that let you. So I'm thinking also, I'm forgetting the name of this type of meditation, but there's a type where you sort of breathe in your sort of negative feeling. Like let's just say you're really angry. You breathe in negative feelings and then you breathe out like white light. And you do that for a while, and you can then start imagine other people that are really angry and remind yourself that you're not like alone and isolated in this experience. Like, I don't know, let's just say I was driving home after work and I got cut off by somebody and I was really mad. And it's like 20 minutes later and I'm finally home and I'm like really pissed still. I might do a whole meditation where I'm sort of breathing in the anger and thinking about all the other people in the Bay Area that are angry that got cut off by somebody in traffic, which sounds really weird over time, but you can sort of feel less alone and you're like, okay, yeah, this is a normal human emotion. And over time, the emotion goes away. You don't feel the need to hold on to that story. And that might only take, I don't know, for me, it doesn't take that long typically, but I'm also not a Scorpio moon. Um, but yeah, sort of time where you can feel your feels, let them go, spending time in the water can be really good. Um, I also find these folks really love sometimes ancestral practices or sort of working with ancestors can be very helpful for these folks. If that's something that kind of calls to you as well.
that's Scorpio. Now, what's next on the wheel? I think it goes, I think you're next.
Yes, we are going to talk about the Sagittarius moons, like myself. Um, these are mutable fire signs ruled by Jupiter. We get very like optimistic, very fun, a lot of charisma. Um, these folks, and I'm not just saying that because I am one. I'm sorry, guys. These folks, this is the zodiac sign of the centaur with who's an archer, and they love to wander. These are folks that love to have space to explore, and that might look like trips and travel. It can also look like really wanting to learn things, wanting to learn about foreign places, new ideas, spirituality. These folks want to like have the grand truth. It feels very, oh God, what's the name of that author who did like The Alchemist? It's like something Coelho, I think. There's lots of these very like
Paul
philosophical.
Coelho.
Oh,
This is my job. This is why I'm here. I'm
incredible.
here to help. Also,
Um,
did you know centaur is an insect?
Centaur is an insect?
It has 6 limbs.
Yeah, I guess centaurs. Oh my God, I guess centaurs are an insect. Wow,
Centaurs are insects. They have 6 limbs.
that's gonna break my brain.
Yeah.
Great. Cool, cool, cool. So they love to, yeah, they love to travel, they love to learn. They are gonna, there's a lot about meaning for these folks. And they want things to have meaning. And so I think part of the hard part with them is that, hey, sometimes emotions aren't super logical. They don't always have a reason. And it doesn't mean that they're less important, right? You don't always need a reason for something. And these folks can get really upset when they don't really have like a framework to put it in. Um, not trying to, as I drag myself. And I think the other thing about them is that they often feel love and care, right? As sort of action and or having things that align with their moral world, their moral worldview. It can make them kind of sanctimonious. It can get them on soapboxes. But it can mean that like sometimes they view love as going to a protest. Beyond just reminding yourselves that emotions don't always have logic or reason, right? Giving these folks space, having time and space to learn and or explore things in foreign places can be really healing for these folks. And that can be something as simple as a K-drama, or it can be planning a trip to some place that's you've never been to in your state. Um, when I have monies, I love to travel and I try to make that something that I do at least once a year, and that's really soothing for me. Um, but I get, yeah, money's not always there and available, and there's so like thinking about other ways that you can kind of bring in different experiences, different places, and ways of learning. That can be podcasts, it can be TV shows, it can be learning a foreign language. One of the beauties of the internet today is that there's a lot of stuff that is way more accessible than it ever has been.
Listen, I love that you said K-drama because you know me and my 2 hour C-dramas. I love those. But there's a
Oh my
lot you can
God.
pick up when you start watching that stuff over and over again, and you'll see like repeated themes, and you'll be like, this must be like something that's related to this, maybe cultural, maybe historical. Let me look it up. And so you do start to explore more in the
Hmm.
culture, and it's very, helpful. You sound silly, but it's the smallest things, really think within like what's in reach, what's in grasp. I think about, how constantly like with folk magic, right? It's similar. You grab what's near to you, you use what's around. And so when you're trying to comfort yourself in such a way aligned with how your moon sign is, which is essentially like kind of your inner world, is how I've always understood it, to work with what you already have around you definitely makes a lot of sense. Like what you're already interested in, what you already like enjoy, like because that's already kind of that part of you. So there's a
Yeah,
lot to be had there, I think.
absolutely. And I think a lot about like what's more sustainable from a self-care perspective. Like something that you can do weekly that's like lets you check in and like refill your emotional well, or something that you're going to do once a year for 2 weeks. Yeah, so when I think about like what is sustainable, what is doable, I would rather it's a little bit easier to like bring something in, a couple hours a week than it is to expect that I'm gonna like, I don't know, I love a good trip, but like that fills my well up only for like maybe a month or so, right? Like it's going to I'm gonna dry up. And we deserve to have things that bring us joy all year round. The last thing I'll say for these folks is that for the Sagittarius moons, that I think it's really important for y'all to find community to engage socially and politically that shares your values. Um, I think it's really isolating for these folks if they feel like their community doesn't share their worldview at some point or another, or share some of the basic values. Not that everybody has to be on the same exact page as you, but like um, some moon signs have better ability to have dissonance around that. I don't see that with the Sagittarius moons as much.
What about with the Capricorn moon?
Yeah, the Capricorn moon cares a lot more about being inside its own sort of tradition and lineage. These folks can be judged as a little standoffish and cold, but it's really because they prioritize physical needs over sort of emotional needs. This is a place where the moon is in detriment. It's like the sign opposite its home sign of Cancer. So it's like as far from home as it can get. This is as far as the moon gets. And the way I like to think about it is like, right, the moon here, this is the beginning of winter, Capricorn, when we kind of get to Capricorn season. And so it's an understanding that, like, as much as we might be angry or frustrated, we've got to like have our physical needs met to have survived to be angry and or frustrated in a few days. um, And so I think for these folks, there's a reminder that, like, hey, 99.9% of the time, we are not in a place where we're in like survival mode. And so, how do you make space and prioritize your emotional needs, right? And or acknowledge the framing I sometimes give these folks is that your emotional needs impact your physical needs, right? Like a lot of us know about the brain gut um, connection. If you are an anxious person like myself, you know that anxiety can really shift your gut from day to day and regulating that, right? So your emotional needs do impact your physical needs. And how is it that when you take care of your emotional needs, you're also taking care of your physical needs? And so that's kind of part of the equation rather than a separate equation. And the other way I think about it for these folks that can be really resonant, right? Capricorn is ruled by Saturn, and it's really a sign around time and lineage and cares about what can endure. And how can there be kind of cultural practices or familial practices that are maybe part of your self-care, right? Maybe your family is really into like, I know somebody who has a family sourdough starter that's like almost 100 years old at this point. I don't know how they've kept it alive this long. It's incredible. But like for a Capricorn moon, it might be really meaningful to be making sourdough bread from this like family starter, every so often. Or it might feel really important to quilt if you come from a line of quilters, or working with kind of cultural practices from your own family and traditions. It doesn't have to be you kind of going back to the ranch and living like a Victorian, but it might be that there's like a habit or a familial thing, or like a meal you make, or um, a weekly tradition that is really important for you to preserve and be part of or maintain. And that can also be a really good way to like, if it's a ritual, it can feel very soothing as well.
Yeah, you don't have to go back to grinding your own wheat. You don't have to get the millstone yourself, but maybe scrapbook. A scrapbook's nice. I love a good scrapbook.
Yeah, scrapbooking is a great one. It's like reading like mythology from your own like kind of, family background. Like maybe like if you're Swedish, like reading Swedish mythology, or like, you know, if you're from, I'm just thinking of like if you're from Egypt, maybe it's like Egyptian history. Like it doesn't have to be super complicated. It can just be sort of something that gives you a sort of touchback or a tie back that relates to you and sort of the traditions you feel like you're a part of.
And like as opposed to like an Aquarius moon, like how's that different than is that
Yeah,
are Aquarians very like ancestrally related or are they more
I joke that these folks are a little more like aliens,
oh
and that's not in a bad way. So this is another Saturn sign, but it sort of is the like outsider Saturn versus the sort of insider Saturn. This is an air fixed sign. So once again, these are very stubborn people. They're very good at maintaining things, but these folks are really into like, they're also standoffish, but they're really into sort of big picture humanity. I joke that these folks are kind of like into the idea of humanity versus um, touchy feely in the weeds with people. And so for these folks, right, they're often going to really love space when they get really emotional, right? They want to be able to kind of get perspective on something, have like a framework for it, than they are to like feel their feels. And so once again, these are people that kind of, I feel like you're probably sick of me saying this, but I'm going to tell you again. You got to get back in your body. You got to feel your things before you start philosophizing. Um,
are you telling me I have to cry before I analyze? That's not fair. Analyzing is
unfortunately,
just so much easier.
yes, you have to do it. And these are the folks that I think really understand that, like, they are often thinking so far ahead that they're like, this is not going to last anyway. So what's the big deal? And I'm like, yeah, but you still have to get through it, right? You're not going to, doesn't get, doesn't go anywhere because you know that in 5 days your things might be different. Um, and not everything, once again, has to fit within a system, right? Not everything has to be philosophically important or strategic. Um, and also, thinking about this in relationship to the people you love and care about, how do you make sure that you articulate your need for space? And or how do you tell people that you need to take a moment and that you're going to be retracting, right? It's okay that you do that, but it's not okay to ghost people, if that makes sense. Which sounds really obvious at times, but like, yeah, sometimes we get emotional and like you need a dip. But like if people don't know, they're often a lot of times people are going to get really agitated and think it's about them. And that can create an additional burden on you. And that you don't need to deal with that. Sometimes you can just say, yo, I'm having a rough day. Can we loop back in 2 days?
So space is a big one for them.
Yeah.
And what else can they do like for themselves, like to communicate, to help themselves communicate, you know, when they're not well? Like, for example, like it's really easy to say, okay, an Aquarian needs space, right? But like in this sort of climate, when we're looking at like the world, right, there's lots of
Yeah.
space, like maybe turning off the news, things like that, taking space, turning off social media, disconnecting from that.
This might sound really robotic and I don't mean it that way, but if you get overwhelmed and you like don't want to have to deal with it, having some stock phrase that you use like, hey, I'm da 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 da, and that way you can measure. It's easier to communicate if you can just sort of like you just throw in this thing, can be really useful. I think also um, these folks find like learning about technology, often learning about humans and like things like sociology and like psychology is something that's really fascinating and useful. And I think, if you need to take space and sort of lean into that and sort of these sort of systems and the things that you want to learn, I think that can also be really useful as well. Um, it's also, I think, just a reminder that like, and the other way that you can sometimes see it is like, okay, how does the messy emotional moments that feel like they don't fit into your worldview? Well, how is this something that can inform it? How does this become a learning moment? But you have to be observant, you have to be in it, you have to be present in order for that to become interesting data for you. These can be very, very scientific kind of folks. And so, okay, how do you like lean into your frame in a way that's going to then help you learn from it? If there's Moon and Aquarius folks listening to this and you have ideas of things that work for you, please let us know. We want to hear more from you. Pisces folks, very, very different. Uh, these are mutable water folks ruled by Jupiter, and they're all about connecting emotionally. In fact, they can really get lost in other people's emotions. Um, and in some ways, they're really into sort of the merging and the union. I think of sort of ecstatic mysticism is very Moon and Pisces coded. And in some ways, they can enjoy fantasy and dreamscapes more so than the real world. And right, this can lead to disassociation or substance abuse. Lots of just because you don't have the moon in Pisces doesn't mean that's going to happen, right? Lots of people with lots of placements can have that issue. We just tend to see that they want to tune out when things get bad versus maybe deal with an issue.
Can show up, I think, too, not just in substances, but in like logging on and doom scrolling or,
Hmm.
staring at a game that just kind of auto plays itself on a
Yeah.
phone, things like that. So like we can kind of just get into this like automatic, like just as a Pisces rising, as somebody who kind of gets in my head and can be very guilty of things like that, just doing things for the sake of doing things. Like for example, if I like a coffee from a place, boy, will I keep going to that spot for coffee almost every day until it's
Yeah.
unsustainable anymore. And that's, it borders on being a little too much, right? So it's all about creating not limitations. Let's not call it limitations, but a framework for yourself, you
It's
know?
funny that you mentioned that because my first thing I say to these folks is how do you create boundaries?
Yeah.
Specifically between yourself and other folks, but also I think just how do you ground and how do you I think for everybody, I'm always like, okay, you have to get through an emotion in order to like move past it. And like, um, how do you have, I think there's places for escapism. And I think Moon and Pisces can do some fantastic things with it, whether it's like creating sci-fi worlds, being a D&D game master, right? Dungeons and Dragons or TTRP, like tabletop role-playing games, or like creative and beautiful art. And so like having an expression for that is really good. And also like how do you then also come back to the real world, right? Like how do you make sure that you like check in every so often, and you're not escaping yourself? Because no matter where you go, there you are, and your stuff's going to come with you. It's just whether or not you're noticing it this time or not.
I'll tell you what, my mom used to say that to me all the time. When I was younger, I used to be like, I want to move here, I want to move here. And she'd be like, you're gonna take your problems with you no matter where you go. And I was like, and,
Right?
and she was right. She wasn't wrong, it's true. And giving yourself like boundaries, your own boundaries, like that you won't cross for yourself, as like with Piscean placements in certain things where you struggle, is it's important. It can be really helpful. And like even like when you're saying like having like the framework of like a TTRPG or something like that, like you're kind of limited by like what other people can do. So you can't just keep going and going and going and going. Whereas like with like
Yeah.
something, you do have to be cautious because like if you think about it, like if you play like a video game, how long can you go? Right?
Ah,
You can kind of get into that where you said with the Taurus moon, I can sit here for 5 hours and do something. It just, but maybe you won't feel as great about it. Just
exactly. Exactly. And so I think that there's a real beauty in the connection and the desire to connect with other people and connect with them emotionally. And that another way to frame it is that you're going to be better at connecting and being empathetic when you also connect to yourself, right? And so if you are constantly avoiding yourself, you can't really connect well with others because you're sort of missing those connective tools and that connective muscle. Um, and so, yeah, if that is something that you want, if you do want really those deep, beautiful kind of moments, you also have to be able to connect to yourself. Um, and we can't always live in sort of the merged bliss union in this world, unfortunately. Um, and so knowing that you kind of are going to need some of that time to yourself too, and sort of strengthening your own sense of self can be really important to be able to show up for others. Um, I think the moon in Pisces has such a beautiful desire for loving and caring for folks. It's one of it's just a gorgeous placement. And I'm always like, connect with yourself. You are beautiful too. My little watercolor moon.
yeah, it's really a beautiful thing. Something else that I've heard just in general that maybe would be helpful. I only heard it recently, like maybe 2 days ago, was that there are ways to like sort of help certain things in your chart by like connecting with the elemental like association,
Mm,
right? But also like to balance it by connecting like with the opposite elemental association. And so I
yeah.
don't know if maybe like you're struggling with certain things, like if you're like Piscean and you're like, wow, I'm really floating, like, maybe I could come, get in the mud a little more, put my feet in the ground. Maybe that's not opposite, but you know what I
No,
mean?
no, it is actually. So
Um,
water and earth combine together really well, and then it's fire and air. So yeah, with the water signs, we like them to ground, and the earth signs, we want them to like feel their feels. The air signs also need to feel their feels, but there's also sort of an expressive quality, and the fire signs need air, right, to kind of keep going. Um, it really depends on sort of how much ease you have, and sort of there's some probably other factors in the chart for how much you need to sort of strengthen your moon, or you kind of need to take a step back from it, which is a whole other complicated discussion. But yeah, there's definitely different ways to sort of tweak with it depending on your balance and what where if you're finding yourself maybe more over an extreme version of sort of your moon placement, or like you're not really getting into it enough. And yeah, it's not about changing what you need, but working with it in a way that's like healthy and sustainable for you. Um, and when you have that, it's a lot easier to show up in the world as yourself, and also to just like regulate, because like it feels sometimes like the news cycle where like week to week it feels like there's five crises at a time, and that can just be a lot. And also like all the uncertainty, it's like, well, are you gonna like people feeling like worrying about their jobs or making rent, and like there's lots of things that we can't control. There's lots of things we can do to like be supportive of movements and things that we want, but you know, also acknowledging what's within our sphere of influence and like how do we support ourselves and each other through these times is important. Um, and next time, we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about moon signs, but we're going to be focused on the moon in the different houses and what topics might come up and give you sort of some other ideas for how to do some self care and sort of areas of life where this might show up, whether that's around your stuff, your work, your friends, or your family. And so I'm really excited about that. Um, so stay tuned for the next episode where we dive in a little bit deeper.
Thank you very much, guys, and we'll see you next time. Bye.